Do you like fire? Not those little baby fires you make when you go camping. I mean full blown, daggers ablaze, flame throwing, meteor dropping fire. Yeah, baby. This ain't no build for the easily sunburnt. No way. If you want to play this build, you better lather up with some SPF 500 levels of sunscreen, because this baby burns. I mean, if you're into that sort of thing, that'd be weird, right? Being that into fire, people might start to get concerned. But anyways, this build's pretty hot. So hello and welcome. This is the Dragonsong Marksman, and it is a lot of fire. That's basically what, yeah, it's fire. There's all kinds of fire in here. If you're kind of into that thing, then you're going to enjoy this build because it's just procs on procs on procs of different kinds of fire all over the place. And it's pretty, I was going to say it's pretty cool, but it's pretty much the opposite of that. It's great. It's amongst my favorite builds, which is why I have a build guide on it on Maxroll. And if you're looking for a marksman that's a different flavor, but also still really performant, really good, then maybe this is the one that's up your alley. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into this build. We'll get into the pros and cons, and we'll go into the skills, the passives, the gear, and etc. So let's talk about the pros and cons. First up, it is fast and mobile. It's not the fastest build in the game, but it is definitely fast enough. It will move from pack to pack very quickly and then take them out pretty quickly. It has great gear scaling. It has a number of items that will scale up with additional investment, so it always feels satisfying to gear this character. It is a fun proc-based playstyle. It procs the Dragonsong proc from the bow, which is where the whole build gets its name from. It procs meteors from Harbinger of Stars, and it also has procs right built into Cinder Strike, including some, well, mostly some daggers, burning daggers that also. So you have Cinder Strike's own attack, burning daggers that come out from it, and both of those can proc both Dragonsong and Meteor from Harbinger of Stars. It also has multiple defensive layers. It is not the tankiest thing in the world, but it is certainly tanky enough to get pretty close to enemies and deal with them, as long as you're not doing really, really difficult content. And if it is more difficult, you can stand farther away, and it can still hit enemies from about a medium distance. The cons are it does require uniques, at least one, arguably two. Dragonsong is what the whole build's based around. You can play something like this with just Cinder Strike and burning daggers, but the damage is going to be much, much lower. You really want Dragonsong to play this. And then Morning Frost or Immolator's Ablation, I think it's called, the belt. One or the other you're going to need to scale enough damage on it. So you basically need two to really get it going, but you can start with Dragonsong and you'll be generally okay as long as you have some crit chance. Another item that you don't necessarily need but helps a lot because you need enough crit chance to actually proc Dragonsong, because it requires it, as does Meteor, is Peak of the Mountain, which is not displayed here, but I'm probably going to be adding it to the build actually in the next day, which is just an easier way to gain enough crit. Is a ton of critical strike chance, and the only downside is you can't leech, but this build doesn't need to leech in order to get sustain, so the only downside at that point is getting a high enough LP one to make up for what you're going to lose. But generally, I think for most people, that's going to be the way to go, so we are going to add that as well. Again, the only thing that's really needed here is Dragonsong, but the other ones are all really nice to have that significantly scale your damage, and so you're going to want to get them sooner than later. Okay, other negatives, well, we just talked about must be at or near crit caps to play it. You really need to get your crit going. You technically can play it before that, but you're going to get a lot fewer crits, or a lot fewer Dragonsong procs because you're going to get a lot fewer crits, and it's not going to feel as good, so you definitely want to get that crit up. And Peak of the Mountain is going to be easily the easiest way to do that. It's about 400%, I think, increased crit. And then Dragonsong by itself has 7% base crit. That's 12%, 12, 24, so it's like about 48% or something like that. And if you happen to get a legendary version, even better. Anyway, it's not too hard to gear for, but you can't play it immediately without having Dragonsong and at least some crit. Another downside is you'll sometimes be at negative mana if you're using the belt, Harbinger of Stars, because this thing will sometimes get lucky and proc a bunch, and all of a sudden it's just burned through your mana. It doesn't happen all that often, but it does happen sometimes. If you don't like that, I have an alternative for you that's really good as well. Another Belt Immolator's Ablation will give you a better single target for less clear, but also you won't have to deal with the mana at all. So even if you don't like that issue, it's easily solvable, and the build is still really good. The other thing is that it has less range. The only other thing is it has less range than other ranged builds. It needs to be about medium because Dragonsong proc Dragonfire only goes so far. But it still can stay out of melee range if you're careful. All right, let's go ahead and get into the skills. So the first one is Cinder Strike. This is sort of the applicator of all of the proc stuff. This is where it's all going to generally happen. It's not the only way, but it's most of it. So the areas that are important here, we're going to get some attack speed, which is going to allow us to proc things more often because we're going to attack more quickly. We are also going to pick up Burning Daggers, which is going to allow us to proc more again because these can also crit, just like Cinder Strike, and any crits count for Dragonfire and Meteor. So if they crit, they have a chance to proc them, which creates a lot more procs. The bottom right-hand side are buffs, and there's a lot of very powerful stuff here. So we have Oil Coating, which gives us fire damage per stack. We can get a lot of stacks because this is over 4 seconds. So you get a lot of increased fire damage here. Now, there is a problem with that, which is we're using Morning Frost, and Morning Frost gives us cold damage to attacks and spells. And by the way, this is a spell-based build per point of dexterity. Well, cold damage, not working with fire damage. That's okay, though, because we have elemental vulnerability that will make it an elemental increase in damage instead of fire increased damage. And so it scales both the cold damage of Morning Frost and the fire damage from other sources. We also get dodge rating and fire resistance from Oil Coating. So our fire resistance is basically taken care of from here. We can still cap it to make sure we're always safe. But the dodge rating is really nice. We can get a ton of dodge rating out of this and make ourselves a lot tankier or a lot less likely to get hit. And then finally, we get some Fire Res Shred, and we get some Fire Penetration. Not as valuable here because of Morning Frost, but still has some value. And if you wear the Ablation Belt, or Immolation Belt, this is more valuable. Next up, we have Shift. This is a setup that's going to give you the movement speed, which is really nice, but the big benefit here is shurikens being thrown. And we also get a cleanse out of this setup. The shurikens are going to be being thrown, might seem kind of weird, but the big thing that was going to happen here, or why we're going to do that, is because we're going to pick up a lot of armor this way. So we're going to get 6 shurikens being thrown, 30% armor per shuriken that's spinning around you, and these are going to spin around you. And that gives you 180% increased armor, which is a ton of armor. So this is a big bonus to our armor. And these can also hit things if you're close enough, which will proc more Dragonfires and Meteors. And so a close-up play style will get you even more procs if you can manage it, which is why you probably saw in the video I was getting so close to enemies. Even additional benefit here from shurikens. Next up, we have Decoy. The big benefits here are we get a bunch of dodge rating with an active decoy, as well as crit multiplier per dodge chance. So we're going to be able to get quite a bit of dodge chance when everything is going well, 50% plus easily. We get 2 maximum decoy charges, and we also get some haste out of this, and some fear, and a little bit of armor and frailty stacks. Last thing we have is Smoke Bomb. So Smoke Bomb is going to be mostly defensive for us. We are going to take Silver Shroud, we are going to take Dust Shroud, which gives us dodge rating and glancing blow, and we are going to take damage over time from Crimson Shroud. So that's a lot of very valuable benefits as far as defense goes. Allows us to stand in the fight a lot longer. That's the skills. Let's talk passives. So I mentioned that we can wear the Peak of the Mountain helmet, which turns off any forms of leech. The reason why we can do that is because of sapping strikes and draining arrows, which gives us health per hit, and it gives us a lot of health per hit when you combine the two, and it is easily enough, along with perfect aim, which also gives us health on crit. This is just a ton of sustain, and it makes it so that we don't have to worry about using leech in this build, which allows us to use that Peak of the Mountain and get that crazy amount of crit. We also use Sapping Strikes and Mana Warp for mana gain, and this gives us a ton of mana and allows us to use the Meteor Belt. Without this, it would not work. We get a lot of Armor Shred from Death from Afar, which is very, very valuable. Pursuit gives us some move speed, and then Concentration gives us a bunch more damage. All right, that is the major points of the passive tree. So, we should actually mention here, I didn't mention up here, but I'm going to mention the haste on hit and evasion are always good in like every rogue build, especially that damage taken while moving, very, very good. We do stand in place a lot and attack enemies, so it's not quite as good in this build, but it's still solid and still gives 25% dodge rating as well. So it's very good. Okay, as far as rotation, this is a very, very easy build to play. You will shift your way to enemies. You want to shift quite a bit so that you can maintain the Shuriken bladed armor buff. But the majority of what you're going to do is spam Cinder Strike and watch things get set alight in fire. And yeah, just explode everything with meteors and flamethrowers and fire. Smoke Bomb can be used for extra gap closer. And also as a defensive option. And then you also have your decoy. If you need it, you can throw that out. That's it. It's a 4-button build. There's not really anything to put in that 5th button. So pretty easy rotation. As far as gear, so we talked a little bit about this. Let's go into a little bit more detail. So we already talked about how important Dragonsong is. This is what the build is based around. And we did talk about Harbinger of Stars. This is for the Meteor setup. If you don't want to use the Meteor because you don't like the mana yo-yos, then you will switch to Immolator's Ablation. Immolator's Ablation will give you 4 to 6 spell damage for fire and necrotic skills per stack of Ignite on you. And both of not both, but Dragon Fire is a fire skill. So it's also going to ignite us. And this may sound scary. I can tell you I tested this extensively, and it pretty much doesn't do anything. Ignites on yourself are very weak, especially since your resistances count. And so you can get 10, 12, 14 stacks of this and not really feel it. And if you get lots and lots of attack speed, you can get higher than that. And it's still not going to really affect you. So this doesn't really have much of any downside, except that you don't get meteors proccing all the time and hitting all kinds of enemies and doing a higher clear, but your single target will be higher with this belt. So you can go either way with that. The other thing was Morning Frost. This gives us a lot of added damage. The downside to this is for every dexterity that gives us damage, it also gives us -1 fizz and cold resistance, which means we have to account for that in our gear and continuously make sure that we're capped. So we do have a bit of a balancing act to not take too much dexterity and find ourselves in serious trouble. The rest of the gear is generally pretty straightforward. It's going to be making sure you have your debuffs. Bow attack speed is really powerful on this. If you can get a Dragonsong with the critical strike chance and bow attack speed, this is amazing. That critical strike chance is not bow crit, it is just pure crit, so it counts for your spells as well as your daggers, as burning daggers, as well as your Cinder Strike. So it pretty much covers the gamut of options. Increased dodge rating on your amulet's amazing if you can get it. Plus 3 to Cinder Strike is also amazing. We want crit multi when we can get a hold of it. We want crit chance until we get to cap. And then it's basically stacking health, just like most builds. There aren't any variants for this. There's no low life variant. It can't really go that way and still get enough damage in my testing. It's still I needed Morning Frost. You might be able to get away with it with Immolator's Ablation if you get enough attack speed, but so far I don't think it's really quite worth it. So there's no low life setup for this build, at least as of now. Okay, now let's talk about blessings, and then we're going to talk about idols. Blessings, we want Grand Echo of Slarm to take care of Void Res. We need a lot of resistance because of the Fizz and Cold Res issues. So being able to offload it here is really good. Grand Crash of Waves, we can take the increased stun chance here because we're going to be pulling plenty of elemental resistance elsewhere. So it'll get taken care of. We don't need the lightning there. Grand Survival of Might for critical strike avoidance. If you combine this with a tier 5 critical strike avoidance on Ring, you can crit cap with just those 2 things, which is awesome. We are taking Grand Rage of Winter for a cold shred here on Heront. This will give us 20% more damage on bosses with the cold part of it. If you don't feel like you need more damage, but would like more defense, you can take the increased armor one here. I forget the name off the top of my head, but you can take that one here instead, and that is perfectly fine. And then the last one is Grand Body of Obsidian, which gives us up to 320 armor, which is a lot of armor. The rest of the blessings don't really matter. They're just for target farming, so get them if you want them, but that's all the power blessings. Next up, we've got idols. The big one in here is Throne of Ambition. This is a very valuable, useful, powerful idol. It gives us 2% more fire and cold damage. That's more per stack of ambition, and we get ambition when we hit a boss or rare enemy. This is very powerful on the tanky enemies, and that's when we need the damage the most. That is fire and cold, which are the two things that we're scaling, so this is awesome for that. It also gives us 2% more armor per stack of ambition. This is a more multiplier on armor as well. This is not increased, so this is straight up more armor. We can get up to 20 maximum stacks of ambition, so that's 40% more armor, 40% more cold, and 40% more fire. Excellent for bossing and for killing rares. You really, really want this as soon as you can get it. In fact, in the video I showed you, I don't think I had it, so I'm missing a lot of damage on it. Once you get this, it goes much, much higher. The rest of the stuff, we've got increased health in here and elemental resistance and some shred effects because there's not really anything else that's super valuable in here. So we might as well just scale our health to the moon. We're doing the same thing with the idols in here. Use this spot for resistance as you need it, and then use it for health once you have your resistances sorted out. Okay, the last thing we'll talk about is build scaling. Dexterity is a priority stat for this build because of Morning Frost. So you're going to get increased damage, you're going to get dodge, and you're going to get added damage from it. So you definitely want a lot of it. Just make sure you don't take so much that your resistances can't keep up and it gets you killed. Morning Frost, we just went through everything on there. Be careful with it with the resistances, but it's a big scaler. Bow attack speed is really strong in this build. You proc more when you attack more, It's pretty basic stuff, but definitely really scales damage very quickly, so get it when you can. Grand Rage of Winter, we talked about this blessing. Get it if you want the more damage, otherwise take the armor, up to you. Shred armor, we shred armor very easily on this build, so when you have a source of shred armor, because we attack so much, you're going to be able to shred them very quickly. Throne of Ambition, talked about that one real good. Crit vulnerability is a thing that we can also get and do want, because this will take care of up to 20% of our critical strike chance that we need, meaning you only need to scale 80% critical strike chance on your gear. You're going to get this in the passive tree, so you're going to get naturally, and then you're good to go. We talked about critical strike chance. Scale this, preferably. You're going to do it probably for the peak of the mountain, unless you have like an amazing helmet and you want to do it elsewhere, but peak is the easiest way to get most of it. And then whatever additional crit you need on your gear. Crit multi, get it when you can, but you're going to get 75% just from perfect aim in the passive tree. That's a big amount. And then increased damage, we get a ton of it from oil coating. So we don't need all that much or really any from our gear, because also dexterity we're scaling, so that's a ton as well. Increased damage while wielding a bow is strong though, so we do take that if we can get it. Okay, last up is the defense side. We talked about Smoke Bomb and all the benefits there, including the Silver Shroud, very, very good. Dodge, we've got a lot of dodge here from multiple sources, very good. Glancing Blow, we don't have a ton of Glancing Blow on this build. You could take Arrow Guard to get more. It did just get nerfed on the armor side, so it's not as good, but it still does give Glancing Blow if you want to push Glancing Blow. That is up to you. We don't have it set up this way as our standard setup because we're trying to get some more debuffs instead. Dust Shrouds, we have a good number of Dust Shrouds, mostly from our Smoke Bomb, so this is good. We talked about Shurikens, and the armor scaling is very strong. Armor mitigation, because of Blade of Armor, is quite good actually on this build, much better than you expect from a Marksman. Decoy, we have a number of things in there, but the largest thing is that it taunts. That's awesome. We do want to scale health, especially with large shadow idols with % health if we can get it. Health on hit and crit we talked about as well, how strong this is for taking care of your sustain so that you don't have to worry about leech. Evasion is another thing we talked about. That's 20% damage reduction while moving, so whenever you're moving from pack to pack, this is a good way to make sure you don't take too much damage. And we do get chill and frailty on the build, so that reduces the amount of damage enemies can do and the attack speed that they have. We also do take Ward and Ailment on Harbinger of Stars if we can get it, but it's not the end of the world if you don't have it, because we also can get it on shift. So you should be good to go there. All right, that is everything. The loot filter is in, but it is not 1.0, the 1.0 versions yet. We'll have a separate COF and MG faction filter. by 1.0, so keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, you can use the one that's in there, and it's perfectly fine. The adjustments will be relatively small. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great time with this build and a great time in LE, and I hope you have an excellent launch, and I'll see you all again real soon.